books include Crossfire, The Plot That Killed JFK, and Rule by Secrecy, both of which made the New York Times bestseller list. Crossfire has sold over 1.5 million copies since 1990 and was the book on which Oliver Stone's movie JFK was based. His latest work takes it to another level of discovery in unveiling the sinister trappings of U.S. black ops, cabals, and cover-ups. Inside Job, Unmasking the 9/11 Conspiracies, was written under contract originally to HarperCollins. And they had already cleared the hurdle of legal review. But get this, suddenly, at the last minute, it was canceled. But hey, no sweat. Thanks to Byron Belitzos of Origin Press here in the Bay Area, the book will see the light of day coming this June. His topic today is the 9/11 Conspiracies, a familiar pattern.
It is really a pleasure to be with you all today. And I want you to understand right off the bat that probably you and I might not agree on a lot of things because I'm just kind of an old redneck from Texas, okay? But I'm not stupid, and I have gotten an education, and I do study. And also, I was a little concerned about coming to speak to you all because I thought, what the heck am I going to tell you all that you don't already know? But I have a few items that you might not have heard. Plus, I'm going to see if I can't kind of wrap this up and get this into where we are now, since we're kind of coming down the home stretch on this program. Another thing I might add is, a little aside, this is absolutely the first gathering, the first convention, the first such event as this that I paid my own way to come. Okay? Every other time I go somewhere, I always make sure I get my expenses and my travel, okay? But I felt like this was important enough, and if you people feel like it's important enough to get out, bring yourselves here, try to hear what's going on, then I feel like I need to get here to share with you what a little bit I know. First thing I'm going to do is tell you, the Post Turtle's kind of fun, and you know, in many ways, this is kind of a hoot. I mean, this would be a gigantic joke if it wasn't so damn serious. And I'm looking at a news item that just crossed my desk as I was heading out the door. It seems that a 12-person Army mental health advisory team has just issued a 38-page report on the issues faced by U.S. soldiers in Iraq. Among these is some 35 suicides by our troops in Iraq, including several women. Now, that should tell you right there that there's some problem going on here. There were very few suicides among U.S. troops in World War II. And that's because they knew they were fighting for something. But these people over in Iraq, you know, most of them are reservists. They didn't want to be there in the first place. And I want to tell you something. This is not an issue of support our troops or don't support our troops. I know I totally support our troops, and I feel most of you folks do too. It's not their fault. And I tell you what, I really feel for them, because if you think Gulf War syndrome and all the hundreds of thousands of casualties, both mental and physical, that we're seeing now in the wake of the first Gulf War or something, you wait until these folks get back over here. They're facing twice as much depleted uranium shells, twice as much pathogens, twice as much sickness, twice as much privation. It's going to be a bad thing. And that leads us to the leadership, because that's where the problem is. I have heard mentioned at this program the arsenal of hypocrisy. What an apt name. Bush lands on an aircraft carrier wearing his flight suit. By the way, everybody realizes he didn't fly the plane. Okay, he just rode with one of the top aces. And he tells us to go and support our troops, and yet what does he do? He cuts veterans' benefits. All right? Recently, we had a little controversy kick up because he launched his 2004 re-election campaign with TV ads that played on the emotions by showing the firefighters and the rescue workers at the Ground Zero in New York on 9/11. That brought howls of protest from firefighters associations and from survivors, saying that they thought it was extremely poor taste to use that for his election. Well, folks, it's worse than that. A year ago, he blocked legislation that included millions of dollars for health benefits for the rescue workers and the firefighters at Ground Zero. He's a typical politician. You know how you can tell if a politician's lying to you, right? Their mouth's moving. Now, moving right along. How do we get in this mess? Well, it's real simple. I'm going to quote a former world leader who said, naturally, the common people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. This is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. Who said that? Former Luftwaffe Air Marshal Nazi Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg war crime trials. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? And what's going on now is nothing new. Here's a news clipping from 1987, and we see our old buddy Oliver North as he's trotted out before Congress to lie his teeth off and then proudly admit, I was following orders and I lied to you. Okay? Little Nazi. But I want to read the first two paragraphs of this story so you'll know that what's happening now has been in plans and has been in the works for many years. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North helped draft a plan in 1984, ironically enough, to impose martial law in the United States in the event of an emergency, inspiring a sharp protest by then Attorney General William French Smith. The secret plan called for suspension of the Constitution, turning control of the government over to the little-known Federal Emergency Management Agency, appointment of military commanders to run state and local governments, and the declaration of martial law in the event of such a crisis as nuclear war. Okay, I can understand that. Violent and widespread internal dissent. Wait a minute. Or national opposition to a U.S. military invasion abroad. Maybe it's a good thing we didn't protest Iraq too much, or they would have declared martial law. So what we now know in relation to 9/11 is that foreknowledge and foreplanning, the evidence is overwhelming. The FBI, they knew what was going on. They were sending notes and messages right up the thing. Hey, guys are out here taking flight lessons. Seem to be Arab terrorists. I think they could fly these planes into buildings. All that's flowing up to the FBI, CIA. It was coming in from all over the world. Even the Taliban tried to warn us of what was going to go on. Okay? And, of course, need I mention Operation Bojinka, 1996 in the Philippines. They busted an al-Qaeda cell. And here were plans to hijack airplanes and fly them into landmarks, including the World Trade Center. Need I mention that in 1993, they actually bombed the World Trade Center. And in their courtroom trials, they actually boasted. They said, well, we didn't do it right this time, but we'll do it right next time. And they have the effrontery to tell us that, gee, who could have imagined that they were going to do something like this? It's ridiculous. How many of you remember a day or two after 9/11, the major media was all talking about the suspicious short selling of stocks, right? We all heard about that. Oh, yeah, man, that shows, that proves, especially in American Airlines, United, and their insurance carriers. This proves that somebody had foreknowledge, and we're going to track that with the FBI, and we're going to see if that doesn't lead to Osama bin Laden. You hadn't heard any more about it, have you? It's because it didn't track Osama bin Laden. It tracked the people who are connected to our CIA. And you don't hear about that. No, of course not. And what about Israel? Well, heck yeah, they knew. Israel knows everything. And by the way, recently I saw a comparison of the intelligence budgets as best could be estimated. We spent, in the year preceding 9/11, something like $40 billion, that's with a B, B-boy, $1 billion on our intelligence apparatus. We've got about 24 alphabet agencies, CIA, FBI, NRO, DARPA, NSA. It goes on and on and on and on. And they can't figure out what's going on. Do you know what the yearly budget of the Israeli Mossad is? Only about $375 million. And yet, by all accounts, and by everybody I've ever talked to around the world, said they are the most efficient intelligence service in the world. Did they know 9/11 was coming? Well, heck yeah. How do we know this? Because their own internet message thing, Indigo, messages were going, get out of Manhattan, okay? They had Israelis, as been pointed out in the presentations, filming the World Trade Center, They had the 400-man art student spy ring that was rounded up in this country that was not only spying on 9/11 in New York and Manhattan, but also spying on our military installations, okay? And most of you probably never even read about that. It just barely made a blip in the news media. But just think what would have happened if that had been a 400-man Iraqi spy ring. Oh, man, they'd have beat us over the head with it. Now, that leads some far-out people to conclude, well, then Israel was behind the attack. I don't buy that, but I think they did know it was coming. And the question becomes, did they warn our leadership? Well, obviously, I think they did. All you have to do is look at the facts, look at the circumstances. August 2001, John Ashcroft announced that he's quit flying commercial aircraft. Okay, he'll only fly government chartered aircraft. About that same time, Pentagon officials decided that they're not going to fly commercial aircraft anymore. They're only going to take government charter flight for security reasons. There's even a story I'm still tracking that on the night before 9/11 that several Pentagon generals canceled their flights, okay, for the next morning. And, of course, we all know the story of San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, and he was warned, okay, don't fly to New York, okay? Thanks, folks, for telling the rest of us. Give me a break. Now, we've also heard about Afghanistan, very well presented. That was about two things. And they wanted the oil pipeline through there, okay? And they were told in negotiations in early 2001, according to NIAC, one of the negotiators, that he was told by some of the Americans that if you don't accept our carpet of gold now, you're going to get a carpet of bomb come the fall. And sure enough, they did. We also know from the European media that 95% of the opium, the poppy crops, the opium fields in Afghanistan were destroyed by the Taliban. Yeah, they were probably creeps and idiots and religious zealots, but they were religious zealots, and they did away with the heroin crop. Can't have that. That would disrupt the drug trade all over the world. And we know that all of our top-ranking people, Bushes, the Clintons, all like that. Now, you can't necessarily say that they're drug runners, but they all profit from their investment in the banking industry and the flow of the drug money through the banking system. If there truly was a meaningful and legitimate war on drugs, it's a simple matter to go into the banking system, identify the drug money, and close it off. But they don't do that, do they? No, they want to just bust people on the street and set up an apparatus to strip of our rights and of our freedoms. Okay, and now we know Iraq. Okay, we were told we're going into Iraq because we have to bring them freedom and democracy. Give me a break. When have we ever done that? 50 years of bad foreign policy, we have yet to bring anybody freedom and democracy. So the next thing is, we got to go in there because he's got weapons of mass destruction. No, he didn't. We knew that before they went in there, right? Scott Ritter, our own weapons inspector, said they don't have any. Hans Blix, UN weapons inspector, says they don't have any. Let me tell you how bad the duplicity was. The Bush administration says, we've got a report here from the International Atomic Energy Agency that says he's 6 months away from building, 6 weeks, I think it was, away from building a nuclear weapon. Well, some enterprising news media actually went to the International Atomic Energy Agency and they said, no, we don't have a report like that. So they went back to the White House, and I think as Ari Fleischer says, we were talking about a report they issued in 1991. 1991, I believe 6 weeks has passed since then. Where's the weapons of mass destruction? Okay, so they go back to the White House. And they go to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they says, no, we didn't issue a report like that in 1991 either. So in fact, the only report that we've issued was in 1998, and what we stated in that report was that due to the devastation of the Gulf War in 91, we didn't think Saddam Hussein had the capability of building a nuclear weapon. So everybody told us it was bogus, except Fox News and CNN and NBC and ABC and the mass corporate media that just drowned us in propaganda. So it's all BS. So the next thing is, well, we got to go there for the oil. Got to have oil. We're running out of oil. Oil's getting expensive. And there's some truth to that. But the truth that we had to go get the oil in Iraq is bogus, because number one, we were only getting 16% of our imported oil from Iraq to begin with, and now we're not even getting that, because when the war started, the supply shut down, the pipeline shut down, and now they're bombing it every few days, and it's intermittent supplies. So everything we were told about why we had to go in Iraq was bogus, except perhaps, and I'm not going to go into this, but there's a hell of a story here. Amazing new archaeological discoveries made in Iraq by French and German archaeology teams starting in 1999 and lasting till early 2003. Now, everything they found, all these ancient tablets, ancient scrolls, any of you that are familiar with Zachariah Sitchin's material or some of the ideas along here, we know that there apparently was some high technology that was known in vast antiquity, okay? Now, where would they have taken all that? They took it to the Iraqi National Museum, but it had just been found, hadn't been cataloged, hadn't been cleaned up, translated, so it was all in the basement. According to the Marine colonel who investigated the looting of the Iraqi National Museum, 10,000 pieces were taken out of the basement, and they've only recovered less than 600. What was in there? Could that be why we had to make a beeline for Baghdad? Anyway, what we know is that all this was planned long in advance. This was the defense guidance policy paper under the Cheney Defense Department during the first Bush administration. Said we need to move into Afghanistan. We need to move into Iraq. These were the plans on the drawing board. All they needed was, as Zygmunt Brzezinski said in his book, The Great Game, another Pearl Harbor type attack. Well, we got that on 9/11, didn't we? And what they said at the time was, and it still holds true today, is that attack, so well coordinated with the attendant stripping away of normal security measures, required state sponsorship. Well, who would have been that state? Certainly wasn't Afghanistan. Certainly wasn't Iraq. Well, think about it, folks. Who created Al-Qaeda? CIA and the Saudis. Who created Osama bin Laden? He's a Saudi, and the CIA armed him. And it's just there. Are they still working there? So now, who's behind it? Who was 15 of the 19 identified hijackers? Saudis. Why are they keeping 28 pages hidden from the report? What's in that report? The Saudis. Senator Bob Graham of Florida says the reality is that foreign government, meaning Saudi Arabia, was much more directly involved in not only the financing but the provision of support, transportation, housing, introduction to a network which gave support to the terrorists. He said scores of contacts occurred between the 9/11 hijackers and operatives of foreign officials. They were not rogue agents, he said, but were being directed by persons of significant responsibility within that government. Saudi Arabia. And who is the long-time close social and business friends of the Saudis? The Bush family. Now, shouldn't we be perking up a little bit and demanding some kind of fair investigation? All right. Let me tell you how bad it is. First off, we now have captured Abu Zubaydah. A year ago, he is the top-ranking Al-Qaeda operative, and when he finally spilled the beans, what did he say? He was working for the Saudis. So Al-Qaeda is still working for the Saudis and under the control of the CIA and probably the Mossad. And it's also homegrown. How many of y'all know the name Specialist Derek Lawrence Peterson? Never heard of him, have you? About a year ago, he was arrested in Jacksonville, Florida, late one night, stopped by an alert deputy sheriff. He's dressed all in black. He's got a shoulder holster with a .45. He's got a 12-gauge shotgun in the back and bomb-making materials. They track him back to a Florida power and light station where he had planted a bomb. Okay? Now, how come you haven't heard of Specialist Derek Peterson? Because he was a Fort Stewart soldier. Fort Stewart, Georgia is where we train our elite forces. And his explanation for his activities was he was practicing his night maneuvers. Now, they arrested him and he was being held, and the last time I checked, he had still not had an open court hearing. In my mind, that tells me one of two things. Either this guy's a nutcase that managed to get in the U.S. Army, in which case, in our heightened concern for terrorism, he should be trotted out, tried, the book thrown at him, and his name bannered all over the United States to show that we're not going to put up with these homegrown terrorists. Or he was following orders, he was carrying out a covert agenda of terrorism, of everybody know about Northwoods, okay? Another Northwoods operation to throw the blame off on the false flag, off onto the terrorist, in which case you're never going to hear about him, are you? Well, you hadn't heard about him, have you? All right, so what do we know now? We know, and unfortunately I'm about out of time here, but we know the evidence of foreknowledge is absolutely clear. We know that Bush and Cheney have fought tooth and toenail to prevent any investigation from taking place. When they finally had to back up and say, okay, who'd they name? Henry Kissinger. All right, and that proved such a slap in the face that he had to quickly withdraw. So now we have a new 9/11 commission headed by former New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean and the Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton, both big members of the Council on Foreign Relations. All right. Look at the difference, look at the similarities between 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination. Within hours, despite a lack of any real evidence, one man was blamed for the event along with hints that he was connected to foreign enemies. Official pronouncements were widely publicized only to be quietly admitted as errors later on. Although the jurisdiction of local authorities had precedent, the entire case was taken over by the federal government. In this case, it was not even the FBI or the CIA. It was FEMA that investigated the World Trade Center. Who died and put them in charge? A group of specialists, medical in JFK's case, engineers in the World Trade Center, were convened but limited in what they could view and blocked from conducting an objective probe. Evidence in the case was hastily removed and destroyed, lost forever to an independent investigation. More evidence was locked away in government files under the excuse of national security. Federal malfeasance was excused by claiming lack of manpower and resources. No one was disciplined or fired. In fact, federal budgets were increased and sometimes doubled. Okay, if we were all the directors of a big corporation and our chief of security lost some of our prized assets, I ask you, what do we do? Okay, do we fire him and get somebody who can do the job, or do we double his pay? Well, we double their pay. So I guess now we're going to get twice as much malfeasance. Any alternative to the official version was decried as conspiracy theory and unpatriotic. The federal government used the event to increase its own centralized power. A foreign war, Vietnam in JFK's case, Afghanistan, Iraq today, which would have been otherwise opposed, was supported by a grieving population. And former government leaders, then LBJ and now Bush, formerly under suspicion for election fraud and corrupt business dealings, was suddenly propelled to new heights of popularity. And all of the citizens who knew or suspected that the official version of events was incorrect were quiet because they were afraid to speak out. Now, these are all of this is not conjectures or conspiracy theories. These are the fact. Now we have to ask ourselves, what do you people intend to do about this? Will you continue to be led by a corporate mass media that deceives by omission more than commission and distracts you from the real issues? Will you continue to re-elect politicians who have been in office while all the causes of the current problems were put into place? Will you continue to blindly follow the standards of the two major political parties that have demonstrated that precious little difference exists in their major policies? Will you continue to support a foreign policy that angers and alienates people all over the world with its thinly disguised neo-colonialism? Will you continue to allow the U.S. military to enforce this foreign policy while gaining unwarranted control over our own nation and lives? Will you continue to permit this nation to be the primary seller of arms to the world and then bemoan the fact that these same arms are turned against us? Will you finally take a look behind that green curtain of media spin to identify the globalists who own and control that media as well as the government and hence the military? Will you stand up and exercise your own individual power or stand idly by, frozen by fear, intimidation, or confusion while our remaining liberties are lost? Now, I don't have the answers to those questions. Only you do. Now, thank you for your time. Let's move on. All right, I want to add one quick thing. This is not the time for internal squabbling. I've already heard too much squabbling going on here. Did a plane hit the Pentagon or not? Was it the fires that melted the girders? This is for us to debate within ourselves. What we need to do from this point on is go out and face the world and face the news media with a united front. 9/11 was known in advance. We all agree that. At best, they allowed it to happen, and that's the best you can say about it. When you know the Bush-Saudi connections and the CIA connections and the drugs and everything else, a case certainly can be built that they actually caused the event. All right? But at best, they allowed it to happen, just like Pearl Harbor was allowed to happen, just like they wanted to do with Northwoods, okay? So let's go out and present a united front to the world and tell them 9/11, which is the causative effect of everything we see going on right now, was a sham. We need